Have you ever stood in the middle of your own wedding and realized everyone around you was lying? I'm Elyra. I'm 30. And on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I smiled, nodded, played the perfect bride, all while knowing exactly what they did the night before. No one saw it coming. Not my fiancé, not my stepmother, not the guests clinking champagne glasses, clueless about what I'd planned. Because the truth? This wasn't a love story. It was a setup. And I was the one holding the match. But the real story, the one they'll never forget, that happened after I said I do. Before I tell you how I turned their perfect day into their biggest regret, subscribe. It's a small click, but a big reason I get to keep telling stories like this. And trust me, you won't want to miss this. They say you can feel it, the moment your world begins to crack. For me, it was the morning before my wedding, standing under the iron arches of Forsyth Park, threading lilies into the last bouquet, pretending everything was exactly as I'd always dreamed. The air was heavy with the scent of magnolia and impending rain. Savannah's July heat wrapped around my skin like silk turned sour. I remember brushing a petal off my wrist, then stopping because my hand was trembling, just slightly. I told myself it was the excitement, but deep down, it wasn't. Behind me, the crew bustled about, chairs being adjusted, lanterns checked, runners straightened on dew-kissed grass. But none of it reached me. All I could think about was Torin, my fiancé, my almost husband. I closed my eyes and pictured him, the way he looked when he proposed last fall. On one knee, holding out a ring he could barely afford but swore was worth every penny for you, Elle. I believed him. I believed every word. And now, I wasn't sure if I believed anything at all, because last night, just after midnight, I got a voicemail. I hadn't told anyone, not even Jessa. It came in muffled at first, like a pocket dial. Then Torin's voice, and something else. A laugh, not mine, and then static, the sound of skin brushing fabric, a whisper. My stomach twisted. I shook the memory away, reaching for a bouquet ribbon and tying it tighter than needed. The knot came out uneven. Just like us now, I thought bitterly. I'd spent the last year designing a perfect wedding for a future I couldn't wait to step into. And yet somewhere in the fabric of that perfect day, a thread had been pulled loose. I could feel it unraveling. I told myself it could be nothing. Maybe he was just talking to someone. Maybe I imagined the tone, the way his voice sounded, guilty. But that laugh, it wasn't just anyone's laugh. It was hers, Viora. The woman who married my father and buried him 2 years later. The woman who moved into our house and repainted everything white, like she was scrubbing the memory of him off the walls. The woman who smiled too much when Torin was around. I reached for my phone again, almost compulsively. I didn't play the message. I didn't need to. It was burned into me already. Instead, I opened his last text. You still up? Can't sleep. Thinking of you. I stared at the words like they might rearrange themselves into something honest. I didn't reply. I just watched the screen until it went dark. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, sending loose petals tumbling like confetti. One landed on my chest. I let it sit there. Elyra? A voice called from behind, one of the caterers. Table setup's done. Want to take a look? I turned and smiled, not too wide, just enough to seem like a bride. Looks great, I said. Keep it just like that. Inside, something was shifting. I wasn't sure if it was grief or rage or something colder, something that watched quietly from a corner and took notes. I hadn't told anyone about the message yet, not even Jessa, who'd know by one look if I was lying. I needed time. I needed to think to be sure. But there was one thing I already knew. If what I suspected was true, if Viora had crossed that line, I wasn't going to cry about it. I was going to burn everything she cared about. In silence, in style, and maybe, just maybe, starting at the altar. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. I just laid there staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, the soft whirl of the ceiling fan stirring the humid air, and that message, that voice, looping over and over in my mind. I hadn't played it again. I couldn't, but every syllable was etched into me now. Torin's breathless stammer, the unmistakable rustle of sheets, and the laugh. Hers, Viora's. I knew that laugh. It was sharp and shallow, a sound that always felt like it wasn't meant for you, even when she was standing right in front of you. At 4:12 a.m., I gave in. I rolled over and unlocked my phone. The voicemail was still there, 10 seconds long, innocent on the surface. Except it wasn't. I hesitated, then hit play. A pause. Torin's voice low and barely audible. Wait, hang on, someone might... And then her. A giggle, sheets shifting, then silence. Static crackled and the recording cut off. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a second I wanted to pretend I misunderstood, that I was paranoid, that this was all some cruel coincidence, but my body told me otherwise. Heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest, mouth dry like I'd swallowed dust. I sat up slowly, the sheets tangling around my legs like restraints. It wasn't a mistake. The man I was going to marry had just spent the night before our wedding with my stepmother. And worse, they didn't even bother to cover their tracks. By 6 a.m. I was dressed, my hair still in a messy twist from yesterday's trial run. I grabbed my keys and coat, even though it was already too hot for layers. Savannah was just beginning to stir. The roads were empty, but the air buzzed, cicadas screaming from the oaks and the early sun casting long shadows through the Spanish moss. I parked by the river, hands trembling as I dialed Torin. It rang once, twice, and then, "Hey," he answered groggily. I said nothing. "Elyra?" Still nothing. I could hear him shift. "Is everything okay?" My throat felt tight, like I was holding back something primal. "I listened to your voicemail." Silence. I heard the breath catch in his chest. "That wasn't meant for you," he said, and instantly flinched at his own words. "I mean, God, Elyra, I can explain—" "No," I whispered. "Don't explain. Just tell me it wasn't her." He didn't speak. I waited. And then I heard it again, in the background. A faint voice. A woman's voice. Her voice. My grip tightened around the phone until it hurt. "You're at her place?" I asked, quieter now. "Or is she still at yours?" Torin cursed under his breath. She came over to talk. It got late. I didn't mean for anything to happen." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You didn't mean for anything to happen with my stepmother, the night before our wedding. She said you didn't—" He started. "Don't," I snapped. "Don't put this on me." I hung up. The sky over the water had turned pink, but it looked bruised somehow. Like the morning itself felt ashamed. I stood there on the pier, arms wrapped around myself as if I could physically hold in the rage and nausea twisting inside me. Then the phone buzzed again. "Viora." Of course. I answered it with a finger that barely moved. "Well," she said, voice as smooth as ever, "I figured you'd call eventually, or scream, or stab something. How's the florist holding up?" "You're disgusting." "Oh, honey, don't get dramatic. It was just a mistake." Her tone was wrong, too calm, too clean, and that scared me more than anything. Viora didn't do mistakes. "You planned this," I said. "Did you record that on purpose?" A pause, just long enough to confirm what I feared. "You were never good at keeping Torin interested," she said casually. "He needed something more experienced." My whole body turned to ice. "He's weak," she added, like she was reading my thoughts. "But you? You've always been the emotional one, the perfect little planner, the good daughter, Daddy's favorite. That's why you'll forgive him eventually, maybe even thank me." I nearly threw the phone into the river. Instead, I forced my voice to stay steady. "Why would you do this to me?" She laughed again, like I was a child asking why the sun sets. "Because, darling, you made it too easy." And then she hung up. For a long time, I didn't move. Birds called from somewhere in the trees. The river lapped at the posts beneath the dock, and I just stood there, staring at the screen. The last words she said looped in my mind. "You made it too easy." And that's when something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to wonder why. I was going to find out what she wanted, why she targeted Torin, why she wanted to ruin my wedding, and then I was going to ruin her in return. But first, I needed help. Someone who knew how to break things carefully, legally, quietly. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled until I found him. Calder Voss, my father's old friend, former attorney, the one person Viora never liked having around. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but something told me He'd understand. I hit call. The phone rang twice and then, "Elyra?" His voice was sharper than I remembered. "You okay?" "I need a favor," I said, "and I need you to keep it between us." A pause. Then, "Where are you?" I looked out across the river, Savannah rising behind me like a city in a dream I no longer trusted. "I'm done pretending," I said softly. "Meet me at Joe's Cafe in an hour. I'll tell you everything." And as I stood there, phone still in hand, I felt it, the beginning of something else, something colder than grief, smarter than rage. It wasn't over, not even close. Joe's Cafe sat tucked under a canopy of Spanish moss, the kind of place locals called cozy and tourists called charming. The chipped green paint on the windows looked older than I was. Inside, it smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon toast, the kind of comfort I didn't deserve right now. Calder was already seated at the corner booth, back against the wall, eyes scanning the room like he'd never stopped practicing law. A steaming black coffee sat untouched in front of him. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just nodded once and gestured to the seat across from him. "You look like hell," he said. I slid into the booth and set my phone on the table between us. "I feel worse." He waited, patient, like always. So I told him. Everything. By the time I was done, my voice was raw and the coffee in my cup had gone cold. I'd barely touched it. He leaned back, arms crossed, lips pressed tight like he was chewing on something bitter. "She's done some low things," he muttered. "But this?" "She knew what she was doing," I said. "She wanted me to hear that voicemail, wanted me to break before I even walked down the aisle." His eyes darkened. "She always did like control." I nodded, slow and deliberate. "But this time, I'm taking it back." There was a beat of silence. Then Calder leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Tell me what you want." The question hung there, thick and hot in the air. I could hear the clink of dishes, the soft jazz playing on the cafe speakers, the low hum of conversation around us. But none of it reached me. "I want to ruin her," I said. He didn't flinch. "Good," he said. "Then let's talk strategy." He slid a small leather notebook from his coat pocket and flipped it open. Pages filled with crisp handwriting, names, timelines, legal notes in shorthand only he could read. "I've kept tabs on her," he said, "even after your father passed. I didn't trust the way she took over everything so quickly." "She kept me out of the estate paperwork," I whispered. "Told me it was already handled. I didn't fight it." "You were grieving," he said gently. "She was plotting." The truth settled into my chest like gravel. I rubbed my hands together under the table, fingertips cold and sweaty. "What can we use?" He tapped a line in his notebook. "She's been liquidating assets through shell LLCs in Florida and Georgia. Not technically illegal, but suspicious timing. If we can tie it to an inheritance motive, then we show intent," I finished. He smiled, not a kind smile, a sharp one. "Exactly." But then something in me faltered. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a schemer. I was a wedding planner with a ruined wedding and a heart full of rage. Could I really do this? I looked down at my nails. One was cracked from how hard I'd clenched my fists last night. "I don't want to end up like her," I said softly. "Cold, calculating, hollow." Calder's eyes softened. "You won't. You're not doing this out of greed. You're doing it to survive." I let that sit. I didn't entirely believe him, but I needed to. He pulled a business card from his wallet and slid it across the table. "There's a print shop near Bay Street. Quiet, cash only, no questions asked. Tell them I sent you." I picked up the card and turned it over. On the back was a scribbled phrase in pen. "Never say it, show it." I looked up. "What's that mean?" Calder sipped his coffee. "You're not going to tell anyone what they did. You're going to show them. At the wedding." My breath caught. "You want to keep the ceremony on?" he asked. I hadn't thought that far, but now that he said it, yes. Oh yes, let them dress up. Let them show up smiling. Let them toast to our love with champagne and powdered lies. Then I'd give them the truth. "I'll need footage," I said slowly. "Something undeniable." "You have the voicemail," Calder reminded. "It's not enough. It's just audio." I tapped the edge of the table. "But if I had something visual, something digital, I could turn their own tech against them. A flicker of an idea danced at the edge of my mind. QR codes. Every guest gets one, disguised as a wedding favor, elegant, unassuming, and when they scan it, revelation. I glanced at Calder, who was now watching me like I'd grown teeth. "You've already planned this in your head, haven't you?" he said. I shook my head, lips curling slightly. "Not all of it, but I'm getting there." I reached into my bag and pulled out my wedding planner binder, the same one I'd used to design floral arcs and cake tiers and seating charts. I flipped to a clean page and grabbed a pen. "This time," I murmured, "we're planning a different kind of event." And as I began to sketch out the bones of it, the timing, the cue, the reveal, I felt something shift again. Not sadness, not even anger, focus, rage sharpened into resolve. "I'll need help testing the link," I said, "and a discrete upload location. Can you—" "I've got it," Calder said before I could finish. "But if you're doing this, you'd better be sure. There's no coming back." I met his gaze, steady, unblinking. "I'm not going back," I said. "I'm going forward, through fire." He pulled something else from his pocket, a folded note in thick, cream-colored paper. He slid it across the table without a word. "What's this?" "Something you'll need later," he said, "but not yet." I unfolded it part way, then stopped. A name I didn't recognize sat at the top. I looked up. "Who is this?" Calder just shook his head. "Trust me, when the time comes, you'll understand." And suddenly, just for a breath of a moment, I felt it. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about truth. And someone, maybe more than one person, wasn't done hiding things from me. The attic hadn't changed since my father died. Same warped floorboards, same dusty light bulb dangling from the ceiling like a single exposed nerve. I hadn't stepped foot up here in over a year, maybe longer. The heat was suffocating, thick with insulation fibers and trapped summer air. I wiped sweat from my temple with the back of my hand, then shoved aside a stack of old holiday bins. Each creak of the wood beneath my feet sounded like a warning. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I had to look. After everything Calder told me, after the way Viora weaponized my father's memory, his money, even my fiancé, I couldn't let her be the last word in his story. I needed something that belonged to him, something untouched by her. A half-collapsed box near the window caught my eye. It had my father's handwriting on the side. Neat, all caps, black marker. EK Personal. Do not toss. I crouched beside it, heart hammering like I was about to open a grave. Inside were yellowed receipts, an old watch, letters rubber-banded together, and beneath all of it, a small, leather-bound book. I pulled it out carefully. The leather was stiff, almost brittle. The lock on it was old-fashioned brass. No key. But it wasn't the lock that made me still. It was the name scratched into the front cover. Light, faint, like someone had etched it with the tip of a pen in a fit of anger. Viora. My breath caught. I didn't even know he had a diary, and certainly not one tied to her. The air in the attic seemed to grow heavier. I stood slowly, gripping the diary with both hands like it might disappear if I blinked. Back downstairs, I laid it on the kitchen table like an artifact. Sunlight cut through the blinds in sharp stripes. The silence in the house pressed in close, almost intimate. Jessa arrived 15 minutes later, out of breath, still in her yoga pants. "You said urgent. You okay?" I held up the diary. "You're not going to believe what I found." She dropped her bag, eyes narrowing as she stepped closer. "Is that your dad's?" I nodded. "It has her name on it." Jessa didn't even hesitate. "We're opening it. It's locked." "So?" She was already rummaging in her tote. "You know I took a locksmithing class one summer, right?" "Don't ask." I blinked. "You really contain multitudes." She grinned and pulled out 2 bobby pins and a paperclip. "Give me 5 minutes and caffeine." As she worked, I paced. If this was what I thought it was, if this diary held proof that Viora had been manipulating my father, maybe even long before he died, it could change everything. It could turn my anger into something actionable, tactical, but part of me hesitated. What if it didn't have answers? What if it had more questions? A click. The lock popped. Jessa's eyes widened. "Okay, Houdini, let's go." I sat down slowly, fingers trembling slightly, as I flipped open the cover. The first page was blank, so was the second. But on the third, writing, familiar, my father's. If something happens to me and V's still around, don't believe what she says. I knew, I always knew. The words slammed into me like a punch to the ribs. Jessa leaned over my shoulder, whispering, "Oh my God." I kept turning pages. Most were journal entries, frustrated, fragmented, notes about arguments with Viora, mentions of meetings she kept canceling, phone calls she took behind closed doors. Then something odd, a list of names. Some were real estate contacts, but one was circled twice, underlined. Charles Devlin. I didn't recognize it. I flipped further, and suddenly a folded page slipped out, fluttering to the floor. I bent to grab it. It looked torn from the back of the diary, ripped roughly, as if someone had tried to destroy it. It was a partial legal document, a will. The top read, "Addendum to Estate, Private Clause." There was a name blacked out in smudged ink, but one sentence was clear. "And under no circumstances shall VH retain controlling interest of the properties without EK's living heir's approval." My pulse kicked into overdrive. He'd been planning to block her, and she knew. Jessa leaned closer, whispering, "You think she found out?" "I think she made sure this stayed buried." I stared at the torn edge, the rest of the document, gone. But even this piece was enough to raise questions, especially with Calder's findings about the shell companies. If I could prove she was securing ownership against my father's final wishes, I clenched the page in my fist. She didn't just want Torin. She wanted everything, every inch of my life. "She's been planning this for years," I whispered, "long before I ever met Torin." Jessa looked stunned. "Do you think your dad suspected the affair?" I paused. A memory bubbled up, soft, painful. A year before he died, he'd asked me if I ever felt like I was being watched, if Torin gave me space to be myself. It struck me as strange at the time, but I laughed it off, told him not to worry. I should have listened. I should have known. The betrayal hadn't started last week. It had been coiling around me in silence for years, a slow, silent chokehold. My phone buzzed, a message from Calder. "Need you to see something, urgent, front gate camera from last week." I stared at the text. Jessa caught the look on my face. "What is it?" I shook my head slowly, already standing. "I don't know, but I have a feeling. This just got bigger." The porch creaked beneath our feet as we stepped outside. It was just after 9 p.m., but the Savannah air clung to us, thick, damp, buzzing with the sound of crickets and the occasional distant car rolling over cobblestone. Jessa sank into the old swing like she'd done 100 times before, curling one leg underneath her. I brought out 2 glasses and the half bottle of red wine I'd left unfinished the night my father died. We hadn't spoken since finding the torn will page. My mind had been chewing on it like a dog with a bone, over and over until every angle felt sharp. I poured the wine and handed her a glass. She accepted it without a word. For a while we just sat there. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick with unasked questions. Finally, Jessa broke it. "You think she killed him?" I didn't answer at first. The question twisted in my chest. I looked out at the trees lining the edge of the yard, where shadows pooled beneath the branches. "I don't know," I said, "but I think she made sure I wouldn't question anything." Jessa took a long sip, eyes fixed on the horizon. "That woman doesn't just destroy things. She rewrites them." I nodded. "And she's always smiling while she does it." The swing creaked as I shifted, one hand wrapped tight around my glass. I keep going over it all. That voicemail, the torn will, my dad's entries, how long she's been pulling strings behind my back. Jessa's face tightened. "You know what pisses me off most? That you've been carrying this alone." I swallowed hard. I thought I could handle it. "You shouldn't have to." I looked down, watching a droplet of condensation slide down my glass. "I'm scared, Jess." There it was. Honest, ugly, true. She turned toward me. "Of what?" "That I'll lose everything. That she'll win. That this revenge plan of mine will backfire and leave me looking insane while she walks away clean." Jessa reached over and placed her hand on mine. Cool, steady, grounding. "Then let's not let her win. Whatever you need me to do, I'm in." The words should have comforted me, and part of me wanted to believe them. But there was something else, something I hadn't said out loud yet. "I think Torin still doesn't see it," I whispered. "He doesn't get that she's not just manipulating me. She's manipulating him too." Jessa's lip curled. "You're still worried about him?" "I'm worried about what I'll become if I stop." There was a beat of silence. Then Jessa asked, "What are you planning?" I hesitated, then told her everything about the video, the QR codes, the public reveal, every calculated step Calder and I had drawn up. When I finished, she stared at me. "You're really doing this?" "I have to." She shook her head, not in disapproval but in awe. "You were always the girl who followed the rules. Now you're rewriting them." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe I finally realized the rules were never made for people like me. She looked at me differently then. Not like I was broken, not like I was fragile, like I was dangerous. "You need me to test the video?" she asked. "Make sure the links work? I've got burner accounts." I nodded. "And I'll need your help distributing the codes, quietly, strategically." Her eyes gleamed. "Consider it handled." A moth circled the porch light. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted low and steady. We both went quiet again, lost in separate thoughts. Then Jessa asked, "Do you remember that trip to Tybee our junior year?" I blinked. "What?" She laughed softly. "You were in love with some guy who bailed on you last minute. You cried the whole first day, but by the third you were organizing sandcastle competitions and making everyone call you Event Queen Elyra." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "It's who you are," she said. "You rebuild, even when the tide wrecks everything." Her voice softened. "But just once. I think it's okay if you want to destroy something instead." Her words hit deeper than I expected, because I did want to destroy something, not out of cruelty, but out of justice, out of grief, out of a burning need to reclaim something I'd buried along with my father. A light flickered in the hallway behind us, then movement. I froze. Jessa noticed it too. "Did you see that?" We both stood, instinctively stepping off the porch, scanning the front yard. The gate was closed. No sound, no wind, just something wrong. I moved to the side yard, phone in hand, checked the camera feed Calder had sent earlier. That's when I saw it. The footage from 4 nights ago. A tall figure in a dark coat standing just inside the property line, looking toward the house, watching. They didn't approach, didn't knock, just stood there, and then walked away. I turned to Jessa, my voice barely a whisper. We weren't alone. I couldn't stop thinking about the figure at the gate. Even as I pored over Calder's notes, even as Jessa combed through old bank statements and property records, even as the wedding day crept closer with every hour, I kept picturing that still image, that silhouette, watching, waiting. But for what? I didn't have time to figure it out. Not yet. Calder had called me early the next morning, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get over here," he said. "Now!" His house smelled like tobacco and ink, the scent of a man who still read newspapers and handwrites every thought that matters. When I stepped inside, he was already standing in the kitchen, a page from my father's torn will on the table, along with something else, a folded document I hadn't seen before. "I pulled this from a private lockbox your father kept downtown," he said. "They contacted me after your last name showed up in the estate inquiries." I picked it up slowly. My pulse quickened. A financial amendment, dated 6 months before my father's death. And then I saw it. A clause naming Viora as a contingent beneficiary, but only if I was unable to claim. Unable. My mouth went dry. She didn't just want to inherit. She wanted me out of the picture. Calder nodded. And she had help. He reached for another page. This one typed in cold, stiff legalese, but with 2 names I recognized instantly. Torin Vale and Viora Hensley. A notarized affidavit, Torin claiming I was unfit to manage estate decisions due to emotional instability and grief-related impairment. My hands began to shake. "He signed this?" My voice cracked. "He actually—" "Under duress," Calder interrupted. "Read the fine print." And I did, slowly, line by line. Torin had included a footnote, one I'd overlooked at first. "Statement given under advisement following professional pressure and implied threat to career by one VH." It wasn't much, but it was something. a buried confession hidden in ink. He knew, I whispered. He knew she was using him. Calder gave a dry nod. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it changes the game. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the truth had sucked all the air out of it. All this time, I thought Torin had betrayed me because he was weak, because he'd fallen out of love, because I wasn't enough. But now I saw it differently. He didn't fall. He was pushed. And she, Viora, had been the one pushing. Why would she go this far? I asked, more to myself than to him. What does she want so badly she's willing to destroy everyone in her way? Calder's voice dropped. Control, and whatever your father was about to reveal. I turned back to the files, eyes scanning every margin. Then it clicked. Charles Devlin. The name from my father's diary, circled twice, underlined. At the time, I didn't know why it mattered, but now... Do you know this name? I asked Calder. He froze. Devlin was your father's partner, old friend, until he disappeared from the company without a trace. I blinked. Disappeared? Suddenly, quietly. No lawsuit, no explanation. Just gone. Right after your father married Viora. A chill ran up my spine. So she didn't just push me out. She's done it before. She's meticulous, he said. Every threat gets erased before it can speak. I sat down slowly, staring at the papers again. She used Torin to break me. She rewrote legal channels to cut me out. She's a damn puppet master. And then, as if conjured by that word, my phone buzzed. Torin! I stared at the screen for a long moment, then picked up. His voice was small, broken. I didn't know she'd keep it. The affidavit. I thought, you lied to get her off your back, I snapped. And she used that lie to gut my family's legacy. I didn't mean... You never meant to do anything, Torin. That's the problem. A pause. I miss you, he said, voice cracking. I closed my eyes. Memories came rushing back. His arms wrapped around me on the couch that winter, the way he used to squeeze my hand under the dinner table when Viora spoke too much, the proposal under Spanish moss. All of it rotted now. I'm not the same girl, I whispered, and you're not the man I thought I was marrying. Another silence, then a whisper. She said she'd ruin me if I didn't play along. I felt something shift, not forgiveness, not pity, clarity. She already has, I said, and you let her. I hung up. Outside Calder's window, the wind picked up. The trees bent low, branches scratching the glass like they were trying to warn me. Later that evening, Jessa and I sat with the files spread out across my dining room table. I showed her the affidavit, the clause, the partnership records. Her eyes widened. She's been orchestrating this for years. I nodded. She's not impulsive. She's strategic. She didn't just cheat. She infiltrated, hijacked. And now? Now it was my turn. Jessa glanced toward the wedding vision board still hanging on the far wall. White roses, gold cutlery, a blush and emerald palette. And right at the center, a printed invite with our names still joined in script. You still going through with it? She asked. I met her eyes. Steady, cold. Oh, I'm going through with it. The front door creaked. We both turned. No knock. No voice. Just the sound of a slow, retreating step. And something slid through the mail slot. A cream envelope. No stamp. I crossed the room, heart thudding, and picked it up. Inside was a card. One line handwritten in black ink. You're not the only one planning a surprise. The print shop smelled like toner and old paper, a kind of sterile chemical quiet that settled into your nose and stayed there. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions, just took the flash drive I handed him, glanced once at the file name, and nodded, like it wasn't his first time helping someone commit a silent war. The QR codes were elegant, designed in blush and emerald to match the wedding palette. At a glance, they looked like favor tags, something innocent, charming. But once scanned, they'd open a private video link, unedited footage of Viora and Torin in that hotel room. I'd timed the audio so it would hit just after the priest's "Speak Now" line. I traced one of the cards with my finger. The ink wasn't even dry yet. I felt it smudge a little under the pad of my thumb, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to be perfect. I was here to make sure the truth bled. Back at the house, I laid the cards out on my kitchen table in neat rows, each one tied with a small velvet ribbon. From a distance, they could have passed for expensive favors. Up close, They were fuse wires. Jessa stood across from me, arms folded. You really think people will scan them? They're curious. Always are. She hesitated, then picked one up. You want me to hand these out? Quietly, just the bridal party. A few guests we can trust to whisper. And your Aunt Lacey? I gave her a pointed look. Definitely not Lacey. We both laughed, but there was tension underneath. A tightness in my jaw I couldn't unclench. Because tomorrow, it wouldn't be pretend anymore. Tomorrow was the ceremony. And even now, with my plan coming together, that envelope from last night still sat unopened on my desk. You're not the only one planning a surprise. Who sent it? Viora? Someone else? I hadn't told Calder yet. Something in my gut told me to hold back, not out of distrust, but survival. I needed one card close to my chest. At midnight, I walked the length of the garden one last time. The lights were already strung along the path, soft golden bulbs that flickered in the wind like lazy fireflies. The chairs were lined in 2 even rows. The arbor stood tall at the end of the aisle, its frame wrapped in white roses and eucalyptus. It looked like a dream, but all I could feel was dread pooling beneath my skin. I stood beneath the arch and looked out across the space, empty now, but soon, filled with gasps, whispers, shattered illusions. For a moment, my throat tightened. Not with fear, with grief. I remembered the night I said yes to Torin. He'd made dinner from scratch, burned the chicken, ruined the sauce, forgot the salad entirely. But when he knelt in the kitchen, ring held between flour-covered fingers, I'd thought, this is it. This is the moment my life begins. Now I knew better. My life didn't begin with him. It would begin when I burned him out of it. The next morning came too fast. At 7 a.m., I stood at the mirror, hair wrapped in curlers, face bare. Jessa sat nearby, coffee in hand, cross-legged on my bed, scrolling through a checklist. Dresses steamed, shoes packed, video link double-checked, codes ready to go. I nodded. Elyra, she said softly, you don't have to do this. I met her gaze in the mirror. Yes, I do. There was no going back, and a part of me didn't want to. By noon, I was at the pavilion. Savannah shimmered in full southern heat, cicadas humming loud against the white stone columns. The crew bustled around me, florists, caterers, photographers, and somewhere, out of sight but not out of reach, Viora and Torin were prepping too. The photographer snapped candids while I placed the QR code cards beside napkins and champagne flutes. I moved slowly, deliberately. 1 per table, 1 per section. Just enough. Jessa brushed past, slipping a few into purses and jacket pockets of bridal party members. Silent, swift. The music rehearsal began. Violin strings curled into the air like perfume. My heart beat faster with every note. Then I saw her, Viora, across the lawn dressed in icy gray, too polished, too calm, her eyes locked onto mine. She smiled, not a warm smile, not even smug, just a quiet warning, like she already knew. I turned back toward the arch, adjusted a floral pin, and whispered under my breath, not today. That afternoon, I retested the video from my laptop. It played clean. Torin's voice, her laugh, their whispers, it would hit like thunder in a glass house. By 5, the guests started arriving. I stood in the bridal suite, hands pressed flat against the marble sink, listening to the buzz below. Laughter, clinking glasses, shoes on gravel. I took one deep breath, then another. Behind me, Jessa stepped into the doorway. They're seated. I nodded. Before I tell you how I destroyed them, how I turned their betrayal into a public reckoning, subscribe. One small gesture, but it means the world to those of us who craft these stories for you, because what happened next, you won't believe what I saw. From the edge of the bridal suite, I watched the crowd settle into their rows. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden beams across the grass, catching in the lace of dresses and the edges of champagne flutes. The pavilion glowed beneath a canopy of Spanish moss, the white chairs crisp and orderly, the altar framed in soft blooms that suddenly felt like funeral flowers. Everything looked perfect, but something in the air didn't sit right. Jessa stood beside me, fidgeting with a small piece of tulle on her dress. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. She scanned the rows the same way I had, searching. You see him? I asked. She shook her head. Not yet. I nodded once. I wasn't sure if I meant good or not yet. Torin hadn't texted all day, neither had Viora, but I knew they were here. I could feel it. And then, out of the corner of my eye, movement. Second row, left side, someone sitting alone, a man. Hood up, sunglasses on. Too warm for that. Too deliberate. I looked again. He wasn't watching the ceremony. He was watching me. A flicker of recognition danced along my nerves, but I couldn't place it. Not fully. He didn't belong here. And yet something about him felt eerily familiar. Jessa saw him too. Who the hell wears a hoodie to a wedding? I forced a breath through my nose. Someone who doesn't want to be seen. The officiant called for guests to silence their phones. A murmur rippled across the pavilion. I took my place near the stairs, half hidden behind a row of hydrangeas, just close enough to hear the first notes of the processional music begin. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, from anticipation, from the fact that I had no idea what the man in the hoodie wanted, or why my skin crawled every time his eyes locked on mine. Then, something else. A waiter passing through the aisle slipped, barely, and bumped a guest's chair. The guest bent down to adjust their purse, and paused. A small cream envelope was tucked beneath their chair. They held it up, confused, looked around, set it aside, and that's when I knew. Someone else was planting things today. It wasn't just my plan anymore. I tapped my phone screen. Jessa saw the signal and crossed to the far end of the pavilion. Check under the chairs. She nodded and moved fast, pretending to straighten ribbons and fix seating cards, but I knew she was scanning. And every third or fourth chair, another envelope. Not part of my plan. Not part of anything we'd discussed. I turned, stepping into the shadows behind the main tent, and dialed Calder. He picked up instantly. "You're at the site? Someone else is planting envelopes under the guests' chairs." "What kind of envelopes?" "Cream, no markings." A beat of silence. "Don't open them. Not yet." "Why?" "Because I think I know who's behind it." His voice had dropped, hardened. "And if I'm right," he added, "your stepmother isn't the only one playing long games." The line clicked. I stood there, phone still in hand, staring at the crowd again, at the man in the hoodie, at the way he hadn't moved, and then he did. He rose, slowly, intentionally, and walked toward the back of the ceremony, toward me. My stomach tightened. I stepped forward, ready to speak, but before I could reach him, he stopped, 3 feet away, and slipped something under my chair, then turned and disappeared back into the trees. I bent down slowly, heart hammering against my ribs, and picked up the paper. It was a card, folded in half, same cream stock as the others, inside in the same handwriting from the earlier threat. "You're right about Viora, but you're missing the real story. Don't forget who else benefits when she falls." A chill crept over me, my father's will, the partnership name, Charles Devlin. Was this him? Or someone protecting him? I glanced back toward the guests, now all rising as the music shifted into the bridal chorus. It was time. I was supposed to walk down the aisle now, step into the performance I had built. But suddenly, I wasn't sure I knew the full script anymore. Because if Viora's fall was only part of the story, who else was waiting in the wings? I tucked the note into my palm and took one step forward. And that's when I heard it. A phone buzzing. Loud. A guest's phone, unsilenced, vibrating in their lap. They looked down at the QR code card I'd placed, and then up, their mouth falling open. And another. Gasps. Ripples. I wasn't at the altar yet, but the reveal had already begun, and somewhere in the chaos of the crowd, I felt it again. Eyes on me. But not Torin's. Not Viora's. Someone else. And this time, they weren't just watching. They were waiting. The sound of the violin faded into silence. I stepped into the aisle, veil floating behind me like smoke. Every eye turned toward me, and for a second it felt like the start of a dream I used to want. That moment where the world quiets and you walk toward forever. But this wasn't forever. This was reckoning. As I walked past the rows of guests, I could feel it, the shift. Heads tilted down toward their laps, phones glowed in secret, whispers buzzed like hornets in soft waves. Someone gasped. Someone else said, "Is this real?" Good. They were seeing it. The footage. I kept walking. At the altar, Torin stood stiff, his jaw tight, his eyes darting from me to the crowd to the priest and back again. He didn't smile, didn't blink. Viora sat in the front row, legs crossed, expression unreadable. Her hands rested on her lap, still, polished, unmoved, like she knew what was coming but refused to flinch. I met her eyes for just a second. She didn't look away, neither did I. The officiant cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Another phone buzzed, then another. Someone in the back row muttered, "Oh my God." The priest hesitated, looked toward me, confused. Torin shifted beside me. "Elyra," he whispered. "What's going on?" I didn't answer. He tried again. "Did you do something?" I turned my head just slightly and smiled, then faced the crowd. The officiant continued, stumbling through the vows, voice warbling as the tension thickened like syrup in the July heat. He reached the familiar line. "If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone was watching it. Gasps spread in real time. The video was unmuted on more than one device. Torin's voice, Viora's laugh, her whisper, "She'll never know." The audio hit like thunder in the still air. I turned to Torin. "That's your cue." He looked at me, face pale, lips parted. And then Viora stood, lunged forward. "You vindictive little—" She reached for me, but I stepped aside. Cool, measured. I reached into the bouquet I held and pulled free the second surprise, my father's torn will. The real one, not the one Viora buried. "Before you finish that sentence," I said, loud enough for the guests to hear, "let me read something my father left behind." Gasps again. The officiant stepped back. Viora froze. I unfolded the page, holding it steady despite the tremble in my hands. "Under no circumstances shall Viora Hensley retain controlling interest of the properties without the written approval of his living heir." A beat. Me. Dead silence. Torin looked like he might pass out. Viora stared at the page like it was on fire. "I should have known," she hissed. "You're just like your father, sentimental, weak." "No," I said. "He believed in truth, and I believe in consequences." From behind the crowd, Calder stepped forward. He held a folder. "This document has been notarized," he said. "As of this morning, the estate is being re-evaluated. And you, Ms. Hensley, are officially under investigation for fraudulent inheritance claims." The sound that left her throat was not a word. It was pure rage. "You think this makes you strong?" she snapped. "You think this humiliates me?" She turned to the crowd. "I built this family. I built this wedding. You ungrateful little—" Jessa rose from her seat in the front row and clapped once. Loud, slow. It echoed across the garden like a slap. "I think you should sit down now," she said. The crowd began murmuring. Someone near the aisle muttered, "Is that woman serious?" Another, "She's the stepmother, right? From the video?" Viora's jaw tightened. Her lips twitched. And then, for the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure, unstable, human. She turned on her heel and stormed off, heels clacking down the stone path. But the damage was done. Torin turned to me, eyes red. "Why didn't you just tell me?" I looked at him. Really looked. The man I almost married. The man who let someone else pull the strings. "You never listened when I tried," I said. "And when you finally heard me, it was too late." His shoulders sank. "But I still love you," he said, too quiet. I shook my head. "You don't get to love me after this." I stepped away from the altar, letting the bouquet fall from my hands. The petals scattered across the stone like the ending of a story I'd outgrown. Behind me, the guests murmured, shifted, stood. Some started clapping, some just watched, stunned. I didn't care. I wasn't walking toward an exit. I was walking toward freedom. But just as I reached the edge of the aisle, a hand brushed my arm. Jessa. Her face was pale. "There's more," she whispered. "You need to see this." She pressed her phone into my hand. A new video. But this wasn't mine. It was blurry, shaky, captured through a window. Viora, speaking to someone, a man. I tapped to play the audio, and my stomach turned to ice. She was talking about my father. "He suspected too much," she said. "That's why I needed Charles gone. And if Edward didn't take the bait, I had other ways." I stared at the screen, the breath knocked out of me. Jessa grabbed my arm. We need to talk to Calder, now. The wedding pavilion was nearly empty. Only a few guests lingered, murmuring in confused clusters or pretending to check their phones. The chairs were still in perfect rows, but the illusion of celebration had shattered. Petals were crushed underfoot. Champagne flutes, half full and forgotten, glinted in the low evening sun. I stood near the altar, barefoot now, my heels kicked off somewhere after the confrontation. My dress clung to me, heavy with sweat and ruined expectations. My bouquet had long since been abandoned. Beside me, Jessa kept replaying the video on her phone, her brows furrowed deeper with every loop. "She says his name," she whispered, holding the device between us. "Charles, she didn't just manipulate your father. She orchestrated something bigger." My eyes stayed on the spot where Viora had stood. The memory of her voice still echoed like a venomous stain on the air. He suspected too much. That's why I needed Charles gone. Gone. The word tasted final, but I knew better. "She's not finished," I said. "She didn't just want the money, or Torin, or the estate." Jessa looked at me. She wanted the story, the control. She wanted to rewrite all of it. I sat down on the edge of the platform, the white silk pooling around me like a ghost. My hands were trembling again, from exhaustion, from release, from everything. "What now?" she asked. I didn't know. Part of me thought I'd feel powerful, vindicated, free. Instead, I felt like a hurricane had passed through me, and now all that remained were splinters. "She almost got away with it," I said. "If that video hadn't surfaced." Jessa shook her head. "But it did. And you burned her to the ground." I gave a weak smile. "Feels more like I set fire to everything and now I'm sitting in the ashes." A long silence stretched between us. Then Jessa pulled something from her tote bag and handed it to me. An envelope, pale blue. "This came for you this morning. I forgot to give it to you in the chaos." I frowned, breaking the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, typed, "Elyra, I heard what happened. I've been following it quietly, but now I think it's time I told you the rest. Your father knew more than he wrote down. And he left me something you need to see. Meet me in Charleston, tomorrow. CD Charles Devlin. Not dead, not disappeared, and reaching out now." I felt my pulse jump. She lied about him, just like she lied about everything else. Jessa leaned in. "You going?" I looked around the empty pavilion, the aftermath of my fake wedding, my very real war. I thought about the broken pieces left in my chest, the jagged parts of trust and loss and legacy. And then I nodded. Yes. That night I stayed at Jessa's. Neither of us wanted to be alone. She made tea and lit candles and tried to make the house feel like something safe. But the shadows still felt different now. Not threatening, just loaded. After she fell asleep, I sat on her back porch and stared up at the sky. I thought about my father, his voice, his laugh, the way he used to pat my head and call me Scout, like I was some intrepid little detective with mud on her knees and questions in her pocket. He'd trusted Viora once, and he'd paid the price. I didn't cry for him often, but tonight, I did. Not because I was weak, but because I was finally letting go of the parts of me that had been built around keeping everything together. The next morning, I packed a single bag and drove east. The roads out of Savannah were still wet from an early rain, and the trees lining the highway swayed like spectators, watching something inevitable roll forward. Charleston rose into view like a memory you didn't realize you'd forgotten, clean, cobbled, and old in the way that held stories too big for their bricks. I found the address on the back of the note, a small bookstore near the Battery, tucked between a coffee shop and a row of moss-draped townhomes. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and ink. A bell rang as I entered, and then I saw him. Older than I remembered from my father's old photos, gray at the temples, thinner, but his eyes were the same. Charles Devlin stood at the back, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder, a worn folder in his hand. He didn't smile, just gave a quiet nod. "I was wondering when you'd show." I stepped forward, cautious. "Why now?" He looked at me for a long beat. "Because she doesn't just destroy people, Elyra. She rewrites them. I figured if anyone could stop her story from finishing, it'd be you." He handed me the folder. I opened it. Inside were documents, letters, a medical report, and a ledger I didn't recognize. But one thing stood out, a notarized page dated 2 weeks before my father's death, with one name at the bottom, Viora Hensley, signed as medical proxy. I looked up at Charles, breath caught in my chest. "You think she—" He didn't answer, but he didn't have to, because suddenly all the gaps snapped together. She hadn't just waited for him to die. She may have helped. The folder in my lap felt heavier than it should have. Charles Devlin sat across from me in the back of the Charleston bookstore, watching me like he wasn't sure how much to say or how much I could handle. The air smelled of cedar, dust, and rain-soaked brick. Outside, the sky had turned a stubborn gray, the kind that presses down on your lungs. I flipped through the pages again, slowly, carefully, my fingers brushing across each one like they might vanish. Medical proxy, power of attorney, pre-signed hospice authorization, all in my father's name, all signed weeks before he fell down the stairs, and all linked to Viora. "She timed everything," I whispered. Charles leaned forward, his voice low. "She used that power to rush the estate proceedings. He was still lucid, still writing. But she convinced the doctors otherwise." My mouth was dry. "Why didn't anyone stop her?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because they didn't know, because she made sure of it. I stared down at the final sheet in the folder, a scanned image of a handwritten letter, my father's signature, and one line underlined in thick black ink. If something happens to me, this was not an accident. I blinked hard. "I was going to read this at the wedding," Charles said, "if she hadn't made her move first." I nodded once, slowly. The wedding, the video, the public collapse. All of it had been the explosion. But this was the crater it left behind. I closed the folder. What now? Charles didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled something from his satchel, a cream-colored envelope, worn, slightly yellowed. My name printed on the front in slanted, familiar script. I felt my breath catch. "My father's handwriting," I whispered. Charles nodded. "He gave it to me months before he passed. Said to deliver it when you were ready." I stared at the seal. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I broke it anyway. Inside was a letter, one page, ink slightly smudged in the corners, but every word unmistakably his. "Elyra, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But I hope not lost. I know Viora. I know what she's capable of. I saw the mask slip too many times to ignore it, but by the time I gathered the courage to act, it was already too late. My mistake was thinking I could protect you by shielding you from her. I should have taught you how to fight instead. There's more to this story. I hope Charles helps you find it. But remember, truth isn't just what you uncover. It's what you choose to do with it. Whatever she takes, you can rebuild. Whatever they destroy, you can restore. But your fire, your voice, she can never have that, unless you give it to her. And I know you won't. Love you, Scout." "Dad." The paper trembled in my hands. Scout. No one had called me that since I was 12. The tears came quickly, this time without shame, because I wasn't grieving him anymore. I was hearing him, like he'd been waiting in some corner of my soul, waiting for the moment I'd finally open the door. Charles said nothing as I cried, just sat quietly, the way real friends do when there's nothing helpful to say. When I finally folded the letter, I looked up at him. "This changes everything." He nodded. "There's one more thing." From the bottom of the satchel, he pulled out a flash drive. "What is it?" I asked. "Security footage, from the hospice." My stomach turned. "What kind of footage?" "You'll see." I didn't watch it until that night back in Savannah, alone. The house felt quieter than usual, not in a peaceful way, in a way that made the walls feel like they were holding their breath. I plugged the drive into my laptop and clicked the only file. The screen flickered, grainy black and white footage from a hallway camera. Timestamp, 2 days before my father's death. No sound. But the picture was clear. My father, sitting upright in bed, visibly alert, speaking to someone out of frame. Then, Viora enters. She leans close, says something. He recoils, shakes his head. She stands over him. Then, he slumps. A nurse rushes in a minute later, but the damage was already done. I paused the video and leaned back, my entire body shaking. She didn't just manipulate his care. She was there. She made sure he never got back up. I stared at the ceiling. The fan above me spun slow and indifferent. Tomorrow, I was going back to the estate office, armed with the letter, the footage, and Charles. But tonight, I let myself feel the full weight of what had been taken, and the fury of what I still had left to give. My phone buzzed. It was Calder. "Check your front step. Now." I hurried downstairs, opened the door, a package, no return label. Inside, another envelope, stamped, "For Elyra only." The package sat in my lap, sealed with wax, edges sharp against my skin. My name was written across the front in my father's hand, tilted and clean, the way he used to sign birthday cards, "For Elyra only." I opened it slowly. Inside was a key. No note, no explanation. Just a heavy iron key wrapped in linen, tied with a red thread. I knew immediately what it was for. My father's study, the locked drawer he never let anyone touch. The one I hadn't opened since the funeral, the one Elyra tried to have removed when the will was finalized. I drove straight to the house, the old one, his house. Even though she'd stripped it down, turned it sterile, I still knew the creaks in the stairs, the exact sound the front door made when it closed behind me. It echoed a little too loud that night, like the house knew it had been waiting for this moment too. The drawer stuck at first, years of neglect, but the key fit perfectly. And inside, papers, dozens of them. Old letters from Charles, ledger books, a manila envelope marked Charleston Land Titles, 1982-1996, and one single leather-bound notebook. I flipped it open, and there it was. My father's handwriting, dense and furious. "She's bleeding me dry, quietly, strategically." Torrin was never the plan. She wanted my estate, but more than that, she wanted control. The day she moved Charles out, I should have known, but I was still in love with the lie. I kept reading, page after page, his suspicions, his research, his doubts. Everything I had pieced together these last few weeks, my father had already seen it coming. He just hadn't been able to stop it in time. And then, the last page. "If you're reading this, it means you finally saw her for who she is. Don't just survive this, Elyra. Rebuild it, in your own name, on your own terms." I pressed my hand to the page like I could touch him through it. Not goodbye, just a handoff. 6 weeks later, I moved to Charleston. I didn't take much, just a few boxes, my father's notebook, and enough fire in my chest to start something new. Jessa helped me set up the new business, a boutique event firm. Not weddings? Not anymore. I wanted something with less pageantry, more truth. We called it Second Story Events. Fitting, because every story deserves a rewrite. Elyra? Last I heard, she was under federal investigation. The hospice video made its rounds through the legal channels faster than I expected. Calder filed to have the estate reopened. Charles testified. And Torrin, well, he finally gave a full deposition. He cried during it. But I didn't attend. I didn't need to. My story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation, about waking up in the morning and remembering that my life belonged to me again. 1 week after the grand opening of my new office, I stood at the harbor, barefoot on the wood planks, watching the tide come in. The air smelled like salt and new beginnings. Charles joined me with 2 coffees and a quiet nod. "She'd hate this," he said, handing me a cup. I smiled. All the better. We sat for a while, not saying much, until I asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He stared out over the water. "Because I thought you'd need the pain to understand the truth, but now I think maybe you didn't need the pain. You just needed the right moment." I nodded slowly. He stood to leave but turned back at the last second. "Oh, and your father's final landholding? The one she tried to transfer illegally? It's yours now." He handed me a deed, 30 acres, just outside the city, and a note attached, "For the future you haven't built yet." I watched him walk away, the paper clutched in my hand, the wind tugging gently at my hair. A new beginning, a clean slate. I didn't smile, not yet, but I would, soon. Because here's what I learned. Sometimes the people who hurt you don't just want your happiness. They want your silence. And when you break that silence, when you stand in it, speak through it, You take back everything they tried to steal. Pain becomes power. And the ending you feared, it becomes your new beginning. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment about how you would have handled it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't miss the next story we drop, because you never know whose truth is coming next.